Hey guys, and welcome to Anthropology 2201, and that is my bathroom. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about conspicuous consumption, but first, as usual, let's review from last time. So, last time we learned about individuals in prehistory and how archaeological evidence can shed light on particular human histories. We also learned that archaeological evidence of individuals can give us insight into human agency, where human agency is sort of the ability of an individual to transform the social structure. And the higher up an individual is in the social structure, the more agency that person has. Today's objectives are to know that conspicuous consumption occurred in the past and is occurring in the present. Also, to know that conspicuous consumption was one consequence of agriculture. Third, you should also understand how archaeology can provide evidence of conspicuous consumption. And finally, you should understand how conspicuous consumption could be practical. Okay, so this dude is hilarious. This is the Regional Commissioner of the U.S. General Services Administration, Jeffrey Neely, and he is a prime example of conspicuous consumption because he's in a high-rise apartment in a bathtub wearing a gold chain, drinking 2 glasses of wine because obviously 1 glass of wine isn't enough when you're going to have bathtub wine. And he's actually at a conference in this photo. And at this conference, I'm going to look at my notes here because I want to get this absolutely correct. He spent $822,751. So even though we might not be able to afford to spend $100,000 or close to $100,000 on a conference, or have 2 glasses of bathtub wine, I personally am a 1 bathtub wine kind of girl. We still conspicuously consume in our modern society. So one example of this, and it's my favorite example, next to, of course, Jeffrey Neely, is bacon-wrapped pizza. Don't know why that's a thing. So why do we eat bacon-wrapped pizza and have congressmen who can afford to have bathtub wine, 2 glasses of bathtub wine at that? Well, we can make some inferences based on conspicuous consumption in the past. We can infer that in the past, conspicuous consumption was a display of wealth, and they often practiced it through feasting and human sacrifice. This here is an image of the materials that were often buried in pyramids, and so all of this material would then be taken out of circulation and would not be able to be used by anybody else except for the dead guy, because dead people need furniture. Sutton Hoo is a good example of conspicuous consumption. Sutton Hoo is in England. It's a series of 6th to 7th century Anglo-Saxon burials, including ship burials. So they would literally take an entire boat and bury it. So you can't use that boat anymore when it's underground. Here's an example of an artifact found from Sutton Hoo, and there is a ship burial being excavated. Similarly, the Vikings also practiced ship burials. The Vikings were the early Scandinavians, and they lived in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. In addition to having ship burials as a form of conspicuous consumption, they also sacrificed slaves who were sometimes burned. This here is an example of a Viking ship burial being excavated, and you can see it was rather ornate in style, and they weren't burying the simple, like, thrown away sort of ships. These then were again taken out of circulation and would be no longer able to be used by the military. Another example of conspicuous consumption is feasting, and a prime example of this, of course, is the court of King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII has been notorious for his feasts. His court consumed an average of 1,240 oxen per year, 8,200 sheep, 760 calves, and 1,870 pigs per year. That's just meat. They also had a wide array of other foods. Another example of conspicuous consumption is human sacrifice, particularly that of the Incas. This is a picture of the 15-year-old mummy Juanita, who was discovered in 1995 at Mount Ampato. She died by a blow to the head approximately 500 years ago, and the conditions in the mountains were such that they allowed her to be preserved, almost as she was when she died. Stable isotope analysis and residue analysis have shown that she was drugged with ethanol and cocoa leaves prior to her death. The Incas weren't the only ones who practiced human sacrifice. In fact, human sacrifice was common among societies that were becoming state level. So human sacrifice was common among emerging state level societies. It was common in Mesoamerican cultures, and for the Aztecs, they sacrificed people from nearby tribes using an obsidian knife. And as you remember from our stone tools talk, obsidian is very, very sharp. They would donate the blood then to the Aztec god Conocutl. But people weren't just sacrificing people in South America or Mesoamerica. They were also sacrificing people over in Europe. The bog bodies, this is a bog, by the way. I had to look it up too because we don't have bogs in North America. The individuals would be generally thrown into the peat bog, and the peat bog environment is such that it's anaerobic, so the bacteria would not be able to thrive and decompose the bodies. So we were able to find, well, other people, not me, obviously. Other people were able to find evidence of human sacrifice possibly taking place during the Mesolithic and Bronze Age in 3900 BC, and also during the Iron Age at about 1000 BC. So what could be a possible reason for all this conspicuous consumption? While human sacrifice is a little bit harder to point to, we can definitely pinpoint the reasons for conspicuous alcohol consumption. And one reason to conspicuously consume alcohol is that it sanitizes water, and it is also more sanitary than drinking water, and it helps prevent cholera. Cholera, of course, is a waterborne illness that spreads through contaminated food and water, and it's often fatal if not treated. It causes diarrhea, dehydration, headache, vomiting, nausea, seizures, and shock. And in fact, you can lose up to 4 gallons a day in diarrhea alone. And it's still a modern problem. This is not just something that has occurred in the past. But alcohol kills cholera, and it also some types of alcohol can kill Salmonella and E. coli. So it's likely that societies in the past were using alcohol to sanitize their water and not just as a means of feasting or displaying wealth. For example, the city-state of was surrounded by water, and so, or surrounded by a waterway, see? And so these people would have to basically dump their waste in the same water that they were drinking. And it would only make sense then to drink copious amounts of alcohol to prevent diseases such as cholera, salmonella, and E. coli. So to summarize today's lecture, conspicuous consumption occurred in the past and is occurring in the present. We saw this through examples like feasting, human sacrifice, and alcohol consumption, and for today we can see it in bacon-wrapped pizzas and greedy senators. We also learned that conspicuous consumption was one consequence of agriculture and emerging state-level societies. Third, agriculture can provide evidence of conspicuous consumption through material culture and particular human histories. And finally, conspicuous consumption can be practical. For example, it can combat things like cholera.